Hello, and welcome to part 4 of the Secondary Data mini lecture. I'm your host, Chris Curran, and in this portion, we'll talk a little bit about where to find secondary data. So in the previous 3 parts, we talked about some terms to use to categorize types of data. In this part of the mini lecture, we'll focus on where you can actually find secondary data available to you as a researcher to employ in some of your research studies. So I'll briefly show you some examples that come from 3 different locations, though of course these are only a few of the many possible places where you may find data available. But we'll look at an example of data that might be available from the federal government, data that we might find from local governments, as well as data available from a nice repository called the ICPSR, which is sort of an academic repository. So let's go ahead and take a brief look at each of these different types of data sources. So the first website we'll look at here is the IES NCES website. So the NCES is just the National Center for Education Statistics, and this is a part of the U.S. Department of Education. And so one of the things that the U.S. Department of Education does through NCES is conduct a large number of national surveys on a variety of education topics. So I've arrived at this page called Surveys and Programs that overviews a number of the different types of surveys and data programs that NCES conducts. And what I can see here is that they have their data sets categorized broadly by different types of categories. For instance, there's data around early childhood education, elementary and secondary education, international education, post-secondary college education, and so forth. But let's imagine that I was interested in learning more about preschool, so I might click on the early childhood link here. And what I would find is that there would be several data sets available. In this case, the early childhood longitudinal study, as well as the National Household Education Survey. If I went back and clicked on elementary secondary, I'd see there's actually a much larger number of data sets available. So again, I could scroll through some of these, read their descriptions, think about which ones of these data sets might be appropriate for the type of questions I'm interested in answering. Now, some of these data sets are publicly available, meaning that you can actually download the data directly to your computer from the NCES website. In other cases, some of the data sets are more restricted and you have to apply for a license and have the data sent to you. But irregardless, the point is this data is secondary data that oftentimes is nationally representative, in many cases following 15,000, 20,000 students with surveys of parents, teachers, the students themselves, all kinds of measures around neighborhood conditions, health aspects, the educational environment, and so forth. So these can be very rich studies, not only for answering education questions, but also for answering many other type of public policy questions as well. For instance, I've seen people use the early childhood longitudinal study to examine the impact of healthcare on different aspects of school attendance, child health, and so forth. So there really are a variety and large numbers of variables here that can be useful to a number of different types of researchers. Right, so the NCES data sets and websites give you an example of some of the type of data collected by the federal government. You can find similar types of data sets across aspects of public health, aspects of urban studies, and so forth by searching similar federal government websites. What we'll do now, though, is jump and look at a couple of examples of local government data sources. So one of the big pushes recently has been for local governments to embrace open data initiatives. And many cities, many municipalities actually have a lot of their data available publicly online for use by you as a researcher. So here's an example of the data portal from Chicago. I simply found this page by Googling Chicago Data Portal. And what you'll see here is that they have a wide variety of data related to the city of Chicago. There's data on the crimes that have occurred, there's data on budgetary aspects, data on public transportation such as taxi trips, as well as many other things. I can just scroll through here and see information about food inspections, about land usage, business licenses, and so forth. The wonderful thing here is it's got search functionality. It also has data sets broken down by different categories, so we could see data as it relates to sanitation, transportation, events, ethical issues, environmental issues, education issues, building, administration, and finance, and so forth. But these data sets can be incredibly rich. One of them that I've used a few times in my own work is the crime data. You can, in fact, through the Chicago Data Portal, see crime data going back to the early 90s. And in this case, you can see every crime committed in the city, with information on where the crime occurred, the type of crime that occurred, and so forth. So I've just clicked on this data set, crimes 2001 to present, and what you'd find if you dig into this is that there's ways to actually export this data directly to your computer as an Excel file or CSV file that you can take in this data and begin analyzing. Now, not only does Chicago have this type of data available, but so do many other municipalities. Right? So if we looked at the city of Baltimore, we'd find that Baltimore also has an open Baltimore data portal. And just like the Chicago data portal, they have data categorized by different categories of government, crime, education, neighborhoods, public safety, and so forth. Right, so again, if you were interested in doing some work around the city of Baltimore, you could search the Baltimore Open Data Portal for available data sets. All right, so we've looked then at some examples of data from the federal government, data from local governments. The final data source I want to show you is data from a repository called the ICPSR. This is a wonderful repository that's operated through the University of Michigan and houses a large number of data sets from the academic sector. So what we can actually do with ICPSR is just put in a search term. So maybe I want to search for preschool. I'll type preschool in the search field. And what I'll find is that I will get information on studies and archived data sets that have to do with preschool. So I notice here there's almost 1,300 different data sets that are categorized and archived through ICPSR. All right, so I could then look through these data sets, see what's relevant, see what's not, and find data in many cases that is downloadable and usable in an analysis. So for instance, here I've clicked on some data from the State of Preschool Yearbook, and I'll notice here that there actually is the data set available for download in a variety of statistical package softwares, along with code books and information that explains the variables and the types of data and how it was collected. All right, so this just gives you kind of a taste of the type of data that's available as secondary data on the internet. Right, what you can do as you're beginning to address research questions of your own interest is to go to these resources and others like them to start tracking down data. So hopefully this is a first useful tool to help you experience the world of secondary data and begin finding data that's applicable for research projects of interest to you. All right, so this concludes our lecture series on secondary data. I hope you found these 4 parts to be useful and a good head start into getting you into the world of secondary data analysis.